intertwines with the inexplicable, where the boundaries of reason dissolve into the shadows of uncertainty. Welcome to the Political Twilight Zone. I am your guide through this enigmatic labyrinth, where politics and power take on life of their own. In this dimension, the threads of truth weave a tapestry of intrigue, challenging our perception of the world we thought we knew. In this world, nothing is as it seems, and the truth lies buried beneath layers of deceit. Prepare to venture where reason meets the unexplained, and where the unexplained might just be.
Hi, folks. Welcome back. Another week goes sliding by here. This is Rick Wagner getting it right here on KNZZ 1100 and 92.7, and up there at KGLN 980 and 101.3, podcasting, the internet, ships at sea, of course. You don't forget those, and your indulgence, which I rely upon. We do appreciate your listenership. Our podcast, which is the show recapsulated, so people can hear it or forward it to someone else or whatever, has been doing well, even without me doing any real promotion for it, so I appreciate that. I suspect part of it's probably people in the psychiatric community. They're using it for study, but nevertheless, I mean, there's some people out there perhaps using it for knowledge beyond that. So this week, another week that's much like the same and yet very different. It's another little voyage down the river of weird. And every day is something else that I didn't think I'd see before. You know, people like to say that wasn't my bingo card. I actually get tired of that phrase, by the way. But there are things that we look at like, for instance, I didn't think that I would see the president, what was it, Friday, with Vladimir Zelensky, sort of using some strong language that, oddly enough, I didn't disagree with. I'm not one really for using too much obscenity in my sentences. I try and cut that out. For a long time when I had some jobs where I worked around people that most of the day was spent cussing, as my grandmother would say, it sort of seeps into your vocabulary without you even thinking about it. And when I see it used by some, Kamala Harris, Schumer, various, good Lord, I mean, Newsom, people like that, you see that it's just performative because it seems odd the way they use it. Because they're trying to make some point, like somehow using obscenity is making them sound tough, or, I don't know, enraged, or I sort of brain-addled, if you ask me. It's clearly not a pattern that they're like, oops, I shouldn't have said that. I say that, when I'm out working with the guys in the yard or whatever the case may be. No, it's like I wrote this down so that I could say this. And that feels a little sad, doesn't it? That's what it's come to. Well, I'll show them how tough I am. I'll use the F word on it. People, boy, they'll think I'm a tough case then. Somehow, I think they get that from Trump himself, not because he does that, because they imagine they're trying to be performative in some way to emulate him in their constant, unyielding struggle against everything that Trumpism they imagine stands for. So they think that by cursing and going off the deep end, that somehow that's Trump. It's not Trumpian. This just shows why they don't understand Trump, which is why they don't understand why he's president right now. For instance, you don't even have to go to the obscenity problem to look at someone like poor Letitia James, you may recall, who's I don't understand how this happened, the Attorney General of New York, who isn't exactly the sharpest tool that you're going to find in the toolbox, or even the biggest spoon you might find in the toolbox. Where this last week I watched this kind of incredible piece, and many of you probably saw it because it was played a lot on conservative media, which is like Fox, for instance, that when it comes to cable news, pretty much has the audience of the next three combined. But anyway, this nonsense she was spouting about how she's standing up for, I couldn't quite parse it out, frankly. Look, you did some things that were illegal. Okay. You're the Attorney General. That seems like a bit of counterproductivity to me. And you also did some things that you effectively were in the same sort of column as what you tried to prosecute Donald Trump for. And yet, you don't seem to see that as an interesting conundrum? No, I mean, you're a victim somehow. Well, you are, actually. Letitia James is a victim. She's a victim of her own ideology. She starts something rolling down the hill. She gets caught up in the boulder, and it rolls over her, and she thinks somebody else did it. Well, of course it's not. Now, I'm not big on political prosecutions, as it were. I think it's dangerous. I don't think you got to get a free ride because you did something illegal and are a politician, and it would look bad if another politician prosecuted you. That is always a danger. And it's always going to be a defense. In Trump's case, it was true. In Letitia James' case, I'm sure the scrutiny given to her had something to do with her behaviors with Trump. But the activity isn't. I mean, there's a real problem with what she did. And the fact that she can't seem to see it, and the fact that some of it was just dumb. I mean, her grandniece, which is an interesting connection, living free in the house that was supposed to be Letitia's primary residence, if I recall, who has active warrants, seems to me to be either a mistake of fairly large proportion or a sort of hypocritical ignoring of what's supposed to be your job. And I lean towards the second there. But, she could have rectified this in a lot of ways. And what's really interesting about these kinds of things is that the American public, people in general, unless they're just deranged, usually Trump derangement, sometimes there's people on the right that are a little deranged out there on the fringe. Not as many, I can tell you that. But are incredibly forgiving of people who recognize an error because we all make them. And just saying, I missed that. I tried everything I could to fix it, but I did make a mistake there. And I wish I hadn't. And people will be surprisingly forgiving in that vein because they recognize that you recognize the problem, that by recognizing it in a wholesome and realistic way, you're unlikely to repeat it. And also, you were unlikely to have meant to do it. People can kind of tell when an individual is apologizing or acknowledging a mistake, if it's because someone in their PR department is twisting their arm, or if because they wish it hadn't happened, and under normal circumstances, if they'd have known what was going on, paid more attention, it wouldn't have happened for the most part. That's not the case here. The Democrats now completely interpreted the effect Trump's prosecutions had on his popularity as victimization. And it's true. Trump was a victim of it. But the way he overcame it is what people were interested in and admired. Casting themselves as poor victims of something that was just, it's just so terrible that they're doing this to me, when you've done the exact same thing. I mean, that doesn't seem like a mistake, does it? But you can easily say, oh, look, I checked the wrong boxes on these things. I probably knew better, but I didn't think there was any harm to it. I'm sorry I did it. If I had to do over again, I wouldn't do it. I was just trying to save some money. It was stupid. A lot of people would say, yeah, I get that. Maybe do something to rectify it, or a little bit of something to show that you have a little bit of remorse. And the American public will say, well, I think they learned from that. But we don't seem to get that. We certainly don't seem to get that from the left. What we get is a hysterical response that, how dare you accuse me of doing something that is in fact wrong, that I accused you of doing, and by pointing it out, you are, and then you can fill in the blank of what you're getting accused of. Some ism, some phobia, you name it. Always trying to distract from themselves. It's a curious situation, and I don't think it plays well with most of America. Most of the people doing this live in bubbles. And let's face it, Manhattan is a bubble. Certainly D.C. is a bubble. D.C. is practically a dome. Anyway, They don't really understand what's going on in the rest of the country. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hanging around after that first segment there where it was... Sometimes I just don't really understand where people on the left are coming from. Well, I do kind of, but I don't understand why they think it's a good idea. How about that? I have a bunch of notes here about what's happening this week that I wanted to bring up. As you know, I like to talk about things that are a little different than what's going on, just because I think there are things that are important that don't get enough play. It's so easy just to repeat news every hour, which is what seems to happen on the 24-hour news channels, because unlike what used to happen where they tried to fill it up with different kinds of news and maybe run the big story or two of the day and then add some things to it, now it's just two or three things and they just run from one thing to the next, and the next show starts with the same three things as the last one. But then I've railed about that in the past. I had really hoped that at some point that we would have some more information instead of just aimless, witless, constant reinterpretation of the same information. Anyway, so what I wanted to do is I ran across a really interesting couple of columns that I was looking at on global warming and the sort of hysteria that's been kind of cooling off around it, right? Because some things are starting to just emerge in the regular person category out there. You know, people have good sense, that kind of person. And they're starting to make it difficult to blame everything on global warming. Of course, we know that, global warming is responsible for everything. For instance, any high price of a good in the grocery store is the result of global warming. And any change in perhaps, how much your furniture cost is global warming. You can really tie it to anything. It's really a great kind of religious experience for those who want to cultivate power. And it's something that can be attached to everything. And if you attach it to everything, and then you say, I need to control things that cause global warming, then you can control everything. It's sort of like saying, well, I want to control how power is generated. Oh, okay. Well, controlling how power generation is performed pretty much gives you a tremendous amount of power. Maybe not electrical power, but certainly a power that we don't like to give people very often. So when I was looking at some of these things, we do see some cooling off, as it were, this global warming hysteria, because there are too many facts that have come out, and people like you have become aware of them. And it's very annoying for people that are trying to keep hysteria going. Here's a few things that I thought was kind of interesting. People were saying the summers are getting dangerously hotter. Remember that? And we looked at something by Roy Spencer, and you've heard him before. He's at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. And he's a pretty solid researcher in these things. And he has his head screwed on straight, which a lot of people are misaligned. What he said was the hottest summer days in the U.S. have barely warmed in 40 years. And, of course, the media exaggerates all these trends, right? We create the impression that, it's a runaway heat wave, that pretty soon you'll be sitting in your car trying to run the air conditioner as the tires melt into the ground. There doesn't seem to be anything that indicates that in real life. I mean, the climate does change. We've talked about that many times. You know that. Many of us live in places where even 1,000 years ago, and we know this from sometimes people's writing about what was going on in these places, the climate was different then. And as we say, it wasn't because the pilgrims were driving too many SUVs. Climates change somewhat. And the Earth has went through some really big climate changes. Some of them fairly quick, many of them cyclical. And there's not much we've been able to do about it. This is a strange thing. You see, people who really like climate change have a weird relationship with their own importance, because they think that what they do can control everything. That the Earth, which we used to think was fairly big and kind of, had its own thing going on, now is under the control of just a few people that are mistreating it. And it's incapable of doing anything. I mean, if something happens, it can't survive it, and it lasts forever, and that's it. Well, that isn't necessarily so. It doesn't mean we want to go out and start doing things to purposely harm the environment, but a lot of the environment is much more flexible than we'd like to think. Well, you and I would like to think, not them, though. Like the New York Times, for instance, had some stories that, this was one of them I saw, that the summer heat had killed 3 times as many people in European cities as would have died without human-caused warming. I mean, that's a little hard to parse, isn't it? Those, by the way, numbers in that particular article are from modeling, not from observed deaths. The researcher who did that admitted that the actual data wasn't actually available yet. This is just projection. These were modeled deaths, which would come to surprise to people who supposedly were dead from that, I suppose. And it's not that heat and bad, hot days don't cause problems. It's just that the things that are being broadcast lots of times are based upon simulations and modeling, not from actual reading. It's sort of like the idea that some of these islands are going to be disappearing beneath the rising seas. Has had any proof of that or any indication of that? And we've been saying that for years. And we all know, we go back and look and say, Al Gore didn't say that the world was pretty much at the precipice and it would be irreversible in 5 years or 7 years. And that was like in 99 or something like that. And it just keeps getting pushed back. At some point, you have the little boy that cried wolf problem, and except that the wolf really probably isn't there. And there's no empirical evidence that any islands are sinking beneath the sea. You know, we have some pretty good evidence that a lot of land that used to be above the ocean is below it now. It happened a long time ago. We have several theories about why that happened. We had not just an inch or two rise in sea level, but over probably 1,000 years, we had a 400-foot rise in sea level a long time ago. And we somehow, the Earth didn't fall apart. Now, it had a huge change in what was going on, may have swamped some civilizations, may have done some things like that, but it doesn't seem to be anything that humanity had anything to do with starting or stopping. So when you hear stuff like that, if the sea was truly drowning these islands, we'd see much more evidence of that. It's just not happening. It's just like predicting storms. Remember, how many times do you hear about there's the worst hurricane season we've ever seen? And that's just not true either. The federal hurricane folks last year predicted, I think, they said that the 2025 hurricane season out the Atlantic was going to be above normal. However, despite the fact we've had some bad storms, not one hurricane came on landfall during September, which is the first time that we've been able to record that probably in 10 or 15 years. The long-term data shows that there's no clear upward trend in hurricane frequency or intensity. We just pretend like that is in the news every time it happens, so that we can say that every bad storm is somehow proof of climate change, and every quiet season, which should be proof against it, gets ignored. Let's look a little bit at something else I saw, that solar farms. Now, as you know, I probably sound like I'm against solar power. Not. Solar power has a lot of great uses. It's just limited at this point. And there is a limitation to how much you get out of solar power. Let's face it, a square foot of the Earth, depending on where you're at, but if you're on the ground, only gets so much solar radiation that could be turned into energy. Now, right now, the efficiency of the solar panels at turning that solar energy into power, electrical power, is not particularly great. 22%, up to maybe 30%. We're pushing it. We're trying to get more. But even if it was 100%, there's a limit to how much you can get from solar energy. It's not, you can't keep employing so that you get, well, there's X amount of energy coming to this square foot of land, but we were able to increase that to 120% of the energy. No, there's a finite amount of energy. So it's useful, but it's not endless, which is sort of what you hear from people like it is. And there's all sorts of these kind of unintended climate side effects from some of this stuff, solar farms and so forth. Like we all know kind of the weird things that are happening with wind machines, right? Well, what we've also discovered is that these big solar farms, that they raise the temperature at night around them like 5 to 7 degrees because they absorb so much heat from trying to absorb sunlight, they radiate back at night. It's sort of like walking around in a big city after a really long, hot, sunny day and feeling the sidewalk and the sides of concrete buildings radiating heat back. It's the same sort of thing. Now, that sounds to me like a climate side effect that people would be concerned about. If it were something that they politically didn't like, they'd be all over that. Otherwise, completely ignored. But there's an irony to it that the same panels that are supposed to be helping the climate cool are actually heating up the local stuff around it, right? We're just not getting the right information out. We're not getting bona fide information. We're getting information that's cherry-picked all the time. So you got to kind of keep your ear to the ground, as it were, and realize that a lot of what you're saying is, while not untrue, is just presented in a counterfactual manner. We try and keep up. Just find a place and play your hand. Hi, folks. We're back. Rick Wagner here, getting it right on KNZZ, KGLN, the internet, and various other places. We appreciate you listening in. We also appreciate your visiting our website, which, once again, I'm not selling anything on because I don't understand capitalism, which is therickwagnershow.com, or some of you have the older one, which is thewaronwrong.com. But you can find it that way. There's a lot of news sources on there. I try and get them all together so you can just kind of click from one to the next, like from Newsbusters or from, say, Fox to Breitbart to that. Try and put the links on the same page with some of the stories. And down the middle, I sometimes highlight some stories that I think are especially interesting, or from time to time I write something. And I have to say that you people have been very generous about some of the things I've written. I've gotten some good feedback, which, by the way, you can leave at rickwagner@mail.com. I always forget to say that because a number of people have it. And I read everything, even though I don't have time to necessarily respond because I just don't. But I don't think you're being ignored because I do read everything. And I'm not used to that because, writing columns for many years for various newspapers and publications like I did, I'm not used to being called a deeply stupid man every week. I mean, I kind of miss that. Some of those comments were really kind of interesting. You felt like I must be over the target, right? Because why would it incense people so much? But I do appreciate it. And, pop in there and read them. Do it all the time. Doesn't cost anything. And you can take it or leave it. But maybe it'll make you think. Anyway. So, I had something else, too. In the last segment, we talked about this, a lot of this stuff about global warming and so forth. There was one other thing I wanted to make sure we included, and that was this idea that all this data that we have, this is the hottest day we've had in recorded history since the dinosaurs roamed the earth. Who knows what they're talking about? What we're really understanding is that anything before like the 40s or 50s in terms of temperature, not very well documented, and certainly not as widespread in terms of gathering the data as we're trying to do now. So the further you go back, like they want to go back 100 years, 200 years, whatever, really you're using a lot of what is, in fact, most of it's 19th century data trying to build 21st century models. What kind of sense does that make? The data that you're looking at was used by much less precise measurements in not nearly as many places, and not with the purpose of trying to measure the global temperature, just trying to decide if it was too hot to go out and call the kids in because it's the middle of the day, not because they're trying to see if maybe, we're melting the icebergs in the Arctic Circle. So the data they're collecting themselves it's more than suspect. It's just not very good. It didn't have the instrumentation or the desire at the time, and sometimes the access. And we're using that to compare to things we do now. You can just think about that. And to me, that just doesn't make any sense. The other thing that doesn't make any sense I also wrote about was, how we're watching some of these politicians, J.B. Pritzker, the round mound of Trump-hating syndrome, who thinks he's, presidential material. I mean, I guess if presidential material was mainly gristle, and kind of what you'd trim off of a steak, he would be. But other than that, I don't see it. Anyway, he's been talking about crime, and so some of the other people do some, for instance. There's just nothing to that guy. I got to tell you, it's the more you watch him, the more, it's like he's made out of cellophane. You start seeing through it completely. You realize there's nothing in there. There's some pre-programmed words and sort of a haircut and some pre-ordered things he wants to say that he thinks makes him sound tough or, I'm a fighter. No, you're not. You have ridden the escalator of Democrat politics up to the governorship, and now you don't understand why people are asking, can you really do anything? It kind of upsets you, so you decide, well, I'll just fight Trump. You're not fighting Trump. He's not fighting you. He doesn't care about you. He thinks you're an idiot. That's about as far as it goes. Anyway, Pritzker and people like Newsom have been saying that calling the National Guard in or fighting crime or sending ICE into areas isn't necessary because it's all overblown. You know that crime is going down in a lot of these places, and that they're just trying to make Republicans, and of course MAGA, which making America great again is somehow a bad thing. But anyway, it's somehow misinterpreting that. Actually, that's completely 180 degrees incorrect. The crime statistics that these characters cite, for the most part, as things are, they're getting better, are altered. I mean, they weren't great to begin with, but they weren't purposely screwed around with. Well, from time to time, probably. But now we see pretty clearly that violent crime is, dropping if you listen to some of these. Some of the places like, even the Wall Street Journal had some of that stuff. Violent crime is dropping fast. Crime is plummeting. Violent crime rates sharply, right? That's not true. And let me tell you why. Because it isn't the stats that you need to worry about. It's how those stats are collected and what we decide to call certain types of crime. We know that, right? If you look at the National Crime Victimization Survey, that's a Bureau of Justice Statistics does that, by the way, that violent crime is up 59% overall in a lot of these areas. Sexual assault crimes up almost 60%, robbery up 38%, aggravated assault 60%. It is the largest forward increase in that survey's 52-year history. However, if you look, say, from 2017 to 2020, which we think of as Trump's first term, some of these statistics had fallen 15%. Now remember that these crime trackers that some of these characters on the left are trying to talk about when they say crime is going down are very suspect. Well, they're not suspect. You just see what they're doing. I mean, many police departments just stopped reporting or fully reporting in 2020. They didn't have the manpower to do it. The FBI had some data transition issues, all sorts of stuff. So a lot of them aren't even reporting it. And a lot of them have not reported things that used to be a felony and serious, now have been reduced to misdemeanors or petty offenses, or apparently not reported at all. And it's been shown, I think that it's a good theory to say that FBI data, for instance, in the past, and we're hoping that Kash Patel can change this, has been underreporting actual crime for a bunch of reasons. For one thing is some people don't trust the powers that be, the prosecution, some of these police departments in big cities and so forth, so they're not sure they're going to act. So if you're going to complain about a criminal act and the criminal might know that you complained about it, and the people you complain to you think aren't going to do anything about it, so now you have someone who already is a bad person mad at you and no one to help you. So that has something to do with it too. The report of violent crimes has fallen, even though we know that they're out there when you look at different types of data. If you look for calls for service, this is always an interesting data point to look at. And whenever this gets brought up, particularly in places that say, well, you're over-policing the area, that's the problem. You just say, look, these are people that are calling for help. We're not generating this. We're not driving around targeting people, profiling people, or anything. These are people that are being victimized that are calling us. That's a better indication of things than almost anything out there. We have a lot fewer arrests because of that, because a lot of the criminal activity out there it's not punished. People know it, and the people that enforce it know it. And on minor stuff, they realize that little or nothing is going to happen if they take action. It's going to be a lot of work, and it's going to come to nothing. So if you're out in law enforcement, some of these areas, it's easy to become disillusioned and say, what's the point of me taking this person in? They'll be out the door before I am done making the paperwork up, and nothing will ever happen to them. So that's a depressing thing. Plus, the knowledge that if you involve yourself in certain types of criminal activity, that the sort of showboat thing now is to complain about you, get you in trouble. And that's happened enough times to where law enforcement is very careful about that. Now, interestingly enough, body cameras have been some of the best thing that's happened. Originally, when we started talking about body cameras a few years ago, I was not crazy about the idea because I thought they'd be great in terms of the idea of them, but I thought, but what are you going to do with all this data, right? Because these things are going to be running a lot of the time. So how do you store it? Who's in charge of it? How do you categorize it? I thought it was an administrative headache. But I think they've pretty much solved that now through, you guessed it, computer science and some instances AI, so they can find things that they've stored. And you do have to store it for a certain amount of time. This is always a problem. You're going to store a lot of data just to hold on to because it may be important in the future. How long do you hold on to that stuff? I often wonder that if somebody had to ask me if I were still in that business, because things that are awfully mundane at the time, when something else happens around them, all of a sudden they become important. So how long do you retain the data to see if that's something that happens? And you have to draw an arbitrary number around it, I think. If you have got data that doesn't, in its own transmission, when you look at it, signify something important, you need to hold on to it for a certain amount of time, but then at some point you got to let it go because you just only have so much computational room. But I think we've addressed that fairly well, as much as we can within the constraints of modern computing power, which is in fact increasingly efficient as time goes by. So we have the cities that are downgrading crimes, right? And that doesn't get built into the statistics. It doesn't say that this criminal activity that was reported as a felony 2 years ago is the exact same behavior, but it's now reported as a misdemeanor. That's not how it gets entered. So felonies drop, misdemeanors may go up, but now violent crime is down because felonies are down. Well, that's pretty easy. Just reclassify everything. Or, at the other end of it, just make a bunch of stuff legal. Or, like California did with property crimes, shoplifting and so forth, essentially, the way they were treating it was that there was not a bar to criminal activity, but it only became actionable criminal activity when it reached a certain threshold. I mean, in many people's day, like, I don't know, your father's day, grandfather's day, that if someone stole something from you, that was a problem for them. Now, if it doesn't reach a certain threshold, it doesn't get paid much attention to. And some of those thresholds are pretty high, so that distorts these statistics as well. I mean, we see a lot of things like aggravated assaults, what would be a second-degree assault to get downgraded to a third-degree misdemeanor assault. Some of the assaults with weapons get downgraded to things without weapons. And then they're reported that way. And in some of these cities, which is really weird, because these are cities where they are the most anti-Second Amendment you can find, often don't include weapons charges against people who have weapons when they commit the crime. Because a lot of places still on the books are augmentation if you use a deadly weapon in the commission of a crime. Some of these DAs just don't charge that, assuming it still exists in their statute, depending on their legislature. Like, for instance, I live in Colorado, which is part of the new Confederacy, where we've twisted around the idea of states' rights to mean that we get to cherry-pick the Constitution and about what we think it means, and we get to do things like I saw this, not to veer off too much, but I saw our Governor Polis. Yes, that is correct. We have elected the round-headed kid from the Charlie Brown cartoons, trying to explain this health care compact, what do you want to call it, between Colorado and several other states. Now, Colorado is sort of a low-level rider on that because the big boys are, of course, Oregon, Washington, California, Massachusetts, Illinois, and I think maybe one or two others that are putting themselves together to get more information out. And essentially what they're doing is trying to resist information being put out about health topics by the Trump administration. It's not really meant to help anybody. It's meant to fight. And what caught my attention, by the way, about Polis describing this stuff was when asked, I think it was on CNBC, well, who's paying for this? He said, it's being paid for by a not-for-profit. And then it just went, and nobody asked another question about that. And I was sitting there, what do you mean it's being paid for by now? What not-for-profit are you talking about? And if it's private as a not-for-profit, why are you involved with it? I think we've seen what these not-for-profits really are. I was very interested in that, and although the interview actually was pretty good, they asked him a lot of hard questions, which he just stared at the camera for a moment and said something over and over again. They didn't follow up on that one, which was very strange to me because I think they maybe just misheard it. But that was the biggest question that came out of that. Anyway, so we had this strange thing where prosecutors in areas that if they caught you with a firearm just wandering around the town for your own protection, you would be thrown into a jail where they pump sunlight to you. Don't charge criminals who are using firearms and weapons in some of these crimes because it makes them look bad. So you're seeing all sorts of what's essentially prosecutorial leniency in these things. For instance, one of the, and I'm sorry about it, I didn't write down the source, but in Manhattan, there's several boroughs there, it says 60% of the felonies got downgraded to misdemeanors. And in Chicago, apparently, some murders are now being relabeled as death investigations. Huh. Well, that's interesting. It's true, isn't it? I mean, if someone's been killed or murdered, as it were, you are in fact investigating a death. So it's not like you're not doing that. But boy, it sure has a different kind of ring to it, doesn't it? Death investigations. If you want to really get scared, and I didn't bring them in here with me, but you can just look this up. You can go on the internet and see what the solvability rate for homicides are in some of these cities. And what I'm afraid of is they're terrible. Like in many of them, and I have to say that I think I remember this, but that in some of the larger cities, the homicide solvability rate is less than 50%. That's not good. And you wonder, why would people, commit crimes? Or why would they murder somebody? Well, it's because they may have done it before and got away with it, or somebody else did. Or they think that what I'm seeing is that there's a good chance I'm not going to get found out, prosecuted, investigated, whatever the case might be. So that's pretty frightening. And so you get this weird sort of erosion of this whole system, right? Law enforcement breaks down because they don't feel like they get support, and they don't. Too often, they're the ones being scrutinized, not the criminal. People are reluctant to report crimes because they're afraid if they report them and nothing happens, it just leaves them in harm's way for retaliation. And there's this political pressure for people to run the cities to make them look better than they are. And remember, in most of these cities, police chiefs are not elected like a sheriff. They're appointed by the city. And in some of them, the mayor essentially comes up with the police chief. And if the mayor doesn't want to look like, let's say, I don't want to look like I'm the mayor, that I don't know what I'm doing with my city, maybe I might try and find a police chief that's going to be really light on the complaining side about violent crime. I don't think that's hard to imagine, and I think that's what's happening. Just watch some of the news conferences. And what's this going to end up with? Well, we're going to end up with people like in New York, if Mondami wins, and I think he probably will, although we might be surprised, our socialist/social communist mayoral candidate has a pretty good lead in the polling, but their polling is of likely voters. And if you look at the percentage of people that turn out in New York proper, the Manhattan area and that island there, it's pretty low. So they're polling likely voters. In other words, people who voted before, that fall in these categories. But what we don't really know is if his candidacy is going to scare enough people who don't usually vote to come out and vote. And we haven't really examined that very much. It might happen. There might be a lot of people who have not been polled that are going to come out and vote against the guy because they rightly are afraid of what he's going to do to the city. I think that's not a great possibility, maybe 30%, 20-30%, but it could happen. Because they're talking to people who, in the past, have been a very small minority of individuals who have the ability to vote. Some of them are actual citizens, by the way, that take the time to do it. So there are many people out there who haven't been quizzed by pollsters and whatnot. They're going to say, I haven't voted since Giuliani, but I think I better vote this time. So if enough of those happen, it might change things. I'm not saying it's an overwhelming chance, or even over 50%, frankly, but it could happen. So we need to keep an eye on that. But we've got to be really careful about crime and how people are doing these different narratives on crime. It's the same thing that we talked about with global warming statistics and all of this stuff, is that we're being bombarded with information that is so twisted that it's almost not only not useful, it's harmful. And this is from people who talk about misinformation all the time. I mean, we're falling into that situation where it's almost like if someone is complaining about someone else doing something, you can almost feel guaranteed that they're doing it. Letitia James, for instance. It seems to be, allegedly. We don't really know that because it's just an accusation. And I do believe that has to be the case. I mean, we can't let anybody, whether it be President Trump or Letitia James or someone like that, or John Bolton for that matter, we can't predetermine their guilt or innocence. We have a system, and when we give up on that system, things go crazy. So it still is alleged. But nevertheless, we got to realize that the disinformation and misinformation isn't coming that much from the right. It's coming from people that are supposed to be giving us real information.
Hi, folks. Thanks for listening.
Just a thought.
Listen, if you'd like to listen to more and you want to maybe perhaps have someone else listen to our podcast, you can do so either by going right to our webpage, politicalviking.com, or therickWagnerShow.com. Both of them take you there. You can get links right directly to our podcast, or you can hear our podcast on Podbean, on iTunes, and Spotify, and a couple others. So you can find us. We appreciate it if you do. And if you've heard the show, you want somebody else to hear it, that's a good way to send it to them. Thanks for listening.